I never expected that a routine grocery delivery would dismantle the life I had so carefully constructed. My world was a fortress of solitude, built from meticulously aligned pixels on a screen and the predictable quiet of my own company. I was a graphic designer, a profession that suited my temperament perfectly. I sculpted order from chaos, all from the sterile safety of my third-floor apartment, a space that was less a home and more a museum dedicated to the art of being alone. The walls were a quiet, unassuming gray. The furniture was minimalist and functional, and every object had its designated place. It was a life lived behind glass, and I was both the curator and the sole, lonely exhibit. My only scheduled breach of this self-imposed isolation came on Tuesday afternoons. At precisely 3 o'clock, a man I knew only as Leo would arrive with my groceries. He was the one variable I allowed into my equation, a weekly intrusion of warmth and life that I both craved and feared. From my perspective at the door, he was a masterpiece of casual strength, built of broad shoulders and a steady, grounding presence. He moved with an economy of motion that suggested a deep, quiet confidence, the kind of self-assurance I could only dream of. His voice was a low, pleasant rumble, a sound like distant, harmless thunder that vibrated through the floorboards when he said my name. Each week, the interaction was the same. A polite greeting, the exchange of insulated bags, a brief, almost clinical farewell. Yet, in those fleeting seconds, my mind would become a frantic archivist, cataloging every detail. The way a stray lock of dark hair fell across his forehead. The faint, clean scent of his soap mixed with the crisp air clinging to his jacket. The crinkles that formed at the corners of his eyes when he offered a small, professional smile. He was a piece of art I could admire but never touch, separated from me by the invisible, unyielding barrier of our roles. He was the delivery driver, and I was just another stop on his route. That was the first wall. The second, and far more insurmountable wall, was the one I built in my own head. It was constructed from the sturdy bricks of assumption. A man like that, with his easy charm and quiet masculinity, was surely navigating a world entirely different from my own. I imagined a girlfriend, maybe a wife, a life filled with weekend barbecues and noisy family gatherings, a life of simple, straightforward connection that felt as alien to me as a distant planet. He was a sun, and I was a creature of the shadows, content to observe his light from a safe, unbridgeable distance. To hope for anything more felt like a form of madness, a foolish rebellion against the natural order of things. So I kept my admiration locked away, a secret collection housed in the most secure vault of my heart. My feelings were artifacts, polished and examined in the quiet hours after he had gone. I would replay our 30-second interactions, dissecting his tone, searching for a meaning that wasn't there. His simple, "Have a good one, Julian," would echo in the silence of my apartment for hours, a ghost of a connection that only I could perceive. It was a pathetic sort of comfort, this one-sided intimacy, but it was all I had. It was safe. It was orderly. And it was profoundly, achingly lonely. I had convinced myself that this was enough, that the quiet ache of yearning was a fair price to pay for the security of my solitude. I had no idea that the universe, in its infinite and chaotic wisdom, was about to send a storm to wash all my carefully constructed walls away. That Tuesday began like any other. The sky outside my window was a uniform, slate-gray canvas, threatening a rain that had yet to fall. I worked, lost in the precise geometry of a new logo design, the rhythmic click of my mouse a familiar metronome for my thoughts. The hours bled together, as they always did, until the notification on my phone chimed, announcing Leo's imminent arrival. A familiar flutter of anxiety and anticipation stirred in my chest. I paused my work, ran a hand through my hair, and checked my reflection in the dark screen of my monitor, a ridiculous, reflexive gesture for a man who would only be seen for a moment in the dim light of a hallway. The disruption began as a low rumble in the distance, a sound that I initially mistook for a passing truck. But it grew steadily, a deep, guttural growl that seemed to make the very air in my apartment vibrate. The gray sky cracked open, and the rain began. It wasn't a gentle shower. It was a deluge, a sudden, violent onslaught of water that hammered against my windows like 1,000 tiny fists. The world outside dissolved into a blurry, gray chaos. Just then, my buzzer rang, its shrill cry cutting through the roar of the storm. It was Leo. He was right on time, a beacon of predictability in the sudden madness. I buzzed him in and opened my door, my usual script of polite greetings ready on my tongue. But the words caught in my throat when I saw him. He was soaked. Rain dripped from the ends of his hair and ran in rivulets down his face. His blue work jacket was dark with water, clinging to the solid frame of his shoulders. Despite the soaking, he was smiling, a genuine, slightly breathless smile that was nothing like his usual professional courtesy. He held my grocery bags out, water pooling around his boots on the welcome mat. "Sorry about the mess," he said, his voice a little louder than usual to be heard over the storm. "It came out of nowhere. It's fine. Don't worry about it." I managed, my hands fumbling as I took the bags. The cold, damp fabric of the insulated containers was a shock against my skin. Our fingers brushed for a fraction of a second, a fleeting touch of his cold, wet skin against mine. It was nothing, a meaningless accident, but it sent a jolt through my system like a stray spark of electricity. As I stepped back, the lights in the hallway flickered once, twice, and then died, plunging us into a sudden, profound darkness. A moment later, the emergency lights kicked on, casting the corridor in a weak, eerie orange glow. A collective groan echoed from the other apartments on the floor. The power was out. I could hear the rain lashing against the building with even greater fury, and a new sound joined the chorus, a high-pitched, insistent wail from the street below. A flash flood warning. My phone buzzed in my pocket with the official alert. We were trapped. The orderly world I had so carefully curated had just been washed away in a torrent of rain and an electrical failure. Leo let out a low sigh, running a hand through his dripping hair. He looked past me, down the dark stairwell, then back at the sheets of water obscuring the view from the hallway window. "Well," he said, his voice laced with a weary sort of amusement. "I don't think I'm going anywhere for a while." He looked at me then, his expression unreadable in the strange, dim light. His gaze held mine for a moment that stretched into an eternity. The professional barrier between us seemed to dissolve, washed away by the storm. We were no longer delivery driver and customer. We were just two people, stranded in a dark hallway. Then he asked the question that would change everything. It was quiet, hesitant, almost an apology. "Look, this is a long shot, and please say no if it's weird, but could I maybe wait it out in here? Just until it dies down a bit. The lobby's probably going to be a madhouse." My mind went completely blank. Every system I had in place for social interaction, every pre-written script, every carefully constructed defense mechanism, simply shut down. Leo, the man from my secret collection of daydreams, was asking to come inside my fortress. The chaos was at the gate, asking to be let in. 1,000 anxieties screamed inside my head, a chorus of worst-case scenarios and social fumbles. But beneath the panic, a tiny, treacherous spark of hope ignited. I heard myself say, "Of course. Come in." He stepped inside, and my small, ordered world was immediately and irrevocably altered. The first thing I noticed was the sheer space he occupied. My apartment, which had always felt perfectly proportioned for one, suddenly seemed to shrink around him. He was a mountain in my minimalist landscape, a tangible, breathing presence that the room had to bend and reshape itself to accommodate. He stood awkwardly by the door, dripping onto the small rug, looking as uncertain as I felt. The silence between us was thick and heavy, punctuated only by the relentless drumming of the rain and the distant, mournful wail of sirens. "I can stay right here," he offered, his voice low and careful, as if he were trying not to startle a wild animal. "I don't want to track water everywhere." "No, it's okay," I said, my own voice sounding thin and unfamiliar. Let me get you a towel." I moved through my own home as if I were a visitor, my limbs stiff and uncoordinated. I retrieved the fluffiest towel I owned from the linen closet, a small, ridiculous offering of domestic comfort. When I handed it to him, our fingers brushed again, this time for a beat longer. His skin was cold, but there was a current of warmth beneath it, a life force that seemed to seep into my own fingertips. He murmured a thank you, his gaze soft in the dim, flickering light from the candles I had managed to find and light. The apartment was transformed by the candlelight. The sharp, clean lines of my furniture softened, and the familiar gray of the walls took on a warmer, more intimate hue. Shadows danced in the corners, creating a sense of closeness, of a world shrunk down to just the two of us in this small, glowing space. I was intensely aware of every sound he made. The soft rustle of the towel as he dried his hair, the quiet sigh he let out, the soft thud of his damp jacket as he hung it on the back of a chair. His scent began to fill the room, overriding the familiar, sterile smell of my own apartment. It was a complex and intoxicating mixture of rain, damp earth, and that clean, simple soap I had only ever caught hints of at the doorway. Now, it was everywhere, a subtle, masculine fragrance that seemed to cling to the very air I was breathing. It was both grounding and deeply unsettling, a constant, sensory reminder of his presence, a reminder that the art was no longer behind glass. He was here, in my space, real and overwhelmingly present. To break the charged silence, I offered him a drink. Coffee, tea, water. He asked for water, and I busied myself in the kitchen, my movements clumsy in the near darkness. I was grateful for the simple, mechanical task. When I returned with 2 glasses, he was sitting on the edge of my sofa, his large frame making the carefully chosen piece of furniture look small and delicate. He had taken off his wet boots and placed them neatly by the door. He sat with his elbows on his knees, staring into the flame of a candle on the coffee table, his expression thoughtful and serious. "This is really nice of you," he said, looking up as I approached. "You didn't have to do this, it's nothing," I replied, sitting in the armchair opposite him, maintaining a distance that felt both necessary and foolish. "Anyone would have done the same, I'm not so sure," he said, a faint, wry smile touching his lips. He took a sip of water, his throat moving with the motion. I found my eyes fixed on the line of his jaw, the dark stubble that shadowed his skin. I forced myself to look away, my heart hammering against my ribs. This was a dangerous territory, a landscape of intimacy I was not equipped to navigate. My mind, a frantic cartographer, was trying to draw new maps, to establish new boundaries, but the terrain kept shifting with every quiet breath he took. We fell into a tentative conversation, the storm providing a natural, neutral topic. We talked about power outages and crazy weather, the words acting as a fragile bridge across the chasm of silence between us. His voice was even more captivating in the quiet of the room, a low, calming rumble that soothed the frantic edge of my anxiety. I found myself relaxing, bit by bit, the rigid posture of my fear giving way to a cautious curiosity. Then, he shifted the conversation. "So, you're a graphic designer, right? I see the logo on your invoice emails." I was surprised he had noticed such a small detail. "Yeah, I work from home, must be nice," he said, his eyes scanning the orderly shelves of my workspace in the corner. "All that focus. I'm studying architecture, but I can't get anything done at my place. My roommates always got people over." This small revelation was like a key turning in a lock I didn't know existed. An architect. It fit him perfectly, the appreciation for structure, the quiet confidence, the sense of him seeing the world in terms of lines and forms. It also chipped away at the image I had built of him. He wasn't just a delivery driver. He was a student, someone with dreams and ambitions, someone living with a roommate, not a wife or a girlfriend. A tiny, hairline crack appeared in the second wall I had built, the wall of assumption. "Architecture is structured," I said, the word feeling inadequate. "I guess my work is too. I like order." He gave me a long, searching look, his head tilted slightly. "Yeah," he said softly. "I can see that," and for a moment, I felt completely, utterly seen. It was as if he could look past the gray walls and minimalist furniture and see the carefully ordered architecture of my loneliness. He then confessed something that deepened the crack in my defenses. He told me he hated storms. Not a mild dislike, but a deep, primal fear that went back to his childhood, to a tornado that had torn through his grandparents' farm when he was a boy. He spoke of the sound of the wind, the feeling of the house shaking, the terrifying helplessness. As he spoke, his confident exterior seemed to fall away, revealing a core of vulnerability that was so unexpected, so human, it left me breathless. The grounded protector was afraid of the thunder that I found merely inconvenient. In that moment, my feelings for him shifted from the distant admiration of an art lover to something far deeper and more complex. It was empathy. It was a fierce, protective urge to shield him from the storm that raged both outside and, I suspected, inside him. He was no longer a beautiful, unattainable object. He was Leo, and he was afraid. The dynamic between us had inverted. In this small, candlelit sanctuary I had built to protect myself, I now found myself wanting to protect him. The proximity was no longer just physical. It had become emotional, a charged, terrifying, and profoundly intimate space. As the night wore on, the storm refused to relent. The flash flood warnings remained in effect, and the power showed no signs of returning. We had long since exhausted our supply of small talk, and a new kind of silence had settled between us. It was no longer awkward or heavy. It was comfortable, companionable. We sat on the sofa together now, a respectable but not insurmountable distance between us, watching the candlelight flicker and listening to the rain. The world had shrunk to this single room, a safe, warm bubble against the chaos outside. Leo had grown quiet, his earlier vulnerability replaced by a pensive stillness. He stared into the flame of the candle on the coffee table, his profile etched in gold and shadow. I could feel the warmth radiating from him across the small gap that separated us, a tangible heat that called to the persistent coldness I carried inside me. My internal monologue, usually a frantic buzz of anxiety, had fallen silent. There was only a profound, heightened awareness of him, the soft sound of his breathing, the way his broad shoulders rose and fell with each breath, the tension in the line of his jaw. My own fortress had become a shared space, its walls porous, letting in the scent of him, the sound of him, the sheer fact of him. The carefully maintained distance I had always curated was gone, collapsed by circumstance. I was sitting next to the man who occupied so many of my private thoughts, and the reality of his presence was both terrifying and exquisitely beautiful. Every nerve ending in my body felt alive, humming with a quiet, electric tension. I wanted to close the distance between us, to bridge that final, small gap. The desire was a physical ache in my chest, a longing so intense it was almost painful. He must have sensed the shift in the atmosphere, or perhaps he was feeling it too. He turned his head slowly, his eyes finding mine in the dim light. His expression was serious, searching. The air crackled with unspoken questions. The storm outside seemed to fade into the background, the roar of the thunder replaced by the frantic drumming of my own heart. This was the precipice, the edge of a cliff I had been walking toward all night without even realizing it. One step, one word, one gesture could send me tumbling into the unknown. He moved first. It was a small, almost imperceptible shift, but he closed the distance between us by a few inches. His knee brushed against mine. The contact was electric, a sudden, sharp shock of warmth that traveled up my leg and spread through my entire body. I didn't pull away. I couldn't. I was paralyzed by a mixture of fear and a desperate, soaring hope. His voice, when he spoke, was barely a whisper, a low rumble that was meant only for me. "You okay with this?" The question hung in the air between us, shimmering with 100 different meanings. It wasn't just about him sitting closer. It was about everything. The storm, the power outage, him being here, the look in his eyes. It was an offering of an escape route, a chance for me to retreat back to the safety of my solitude, to rebuild my walls. But I didn't want to. For the first time in a long time, I didn't want to be safe. I wanted to be brave. I could only manage a nod, my throat too tight for words. That was all the confirmation he needed. He lifted his hand, slowly, tentatively, as if giving me every possible chance to stop him. He cupped my jaw, his thumb stroking softly against my cheek. His hand was large and warm and surprisingly gentle. The calluses on his palm were a rough, grounding texture against my skin. It was the first truly intentional, non-accidental touch we had ever shared, and it felt like a brand, a claim. My eyes fluttered shut. He leaned in, and the world dissolved into a blur of sensory information. The scent of rain and soap intensified. I could feel the warmth of his breath on my lips, a soft, hesitant puff of air. And then, his mouth was on mine. The kiss was not demanding or passionate. It was a question. It was slow and soft, and full of a profound, searching tenderness. His lips were gentle, moving against mine with a hesitant grace that belied his size and strength. It was a kiss of discovery, of two separate worlds colliding in the quiet, candlelit darkness. My internal world, the carefully ordered and cataloged museum of my life, simply short-circuited. There were no thoughts, no anxieties, no carefully constructed narratives. There was only feeling, the astonishing softness of his lips, the rough, comforting scrape of his stubble against my skin, the solid, grounding pressure of his hand on my jaw. A wave of pure, unadulterated sensation washed over me, drowning out everything else. My ordered life was over. The glass had shattered. The chaos was inside, and it was warm, and it was real, and it tasted of hope. I kissed him back, a silent, clumsy answer to his unspoken question, and in that moment, I felt the foundations of my fortress crumble into dust. The morning arrived with a jarring, unwelcome clarity. I awoke to the hum of the refrigerator, a sound so mundane and yet so profoundly jarring that it took me a moment to place it. The power was back on. Sunlight, pale and watery after the storm, streamed through the blinds, cutting sharp, unforgiving lines across the room. The soft, intimate world of candlelight and shadows had vanished, replaced by the harsh light of day. And with it, the easy intimacy of the night before seemed to have evaporated, leaving a thick, suffocating awkwardness in its place. I had woken up on the sofa, a blanket draped over me. Leo was in the kitchen, his back to me, making coffee. The familiar, comforting aroma did nothing to soothe the frantic anxiety that was already coiling in my stomach. He hadn't woken me. He had simply let me sleep while he navigated my kitchen, my space, as if he belonged there. He belonged there. Last night, the thought would have thrilled me. This morning, it terrified me. The silence between us was a physical presence, a heavy, unbreachable wall that had been erected sometime in the night while we slept. He turned, holding a mug, and offered me a small, tight-lipped smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Morning," he said, his voice clipped and formal. The low, rumbling warmth of the previous night was gone, replaced by a polite, distant tone that sounded chillingly familiar. It was his customer service voice. "Morning," I croaked, my own voice rough with sleep. I sat up, the blanket pooling in my lap, feeling exposed and painfully vulnerable. My mind, which had been so blessedly quiet during the kiss, was now a roaring tempest of overthinking. The anxiety spiral had begun. What had I done? What had we done? The events of the night replayed in my head, but now they were distorted by the merciless light of day. The tender, questioning kiss now seemed like a reckless, impulsive mistake. A moment of shared cabin fever, a bizarre side effect of a power outage. It couldn't have been real. I convinced myself I had misread everything. He was scared of the storm, I was lonely. We were two strangers thrown together in a weird situation. It was a fluke, an anomaly, a glitch in the orderly programming of our lives. He must regret it. The thought was a cold, sharp pain in my chest. He was probably just being polite now, trying to figure out how to escape without making things more awkward than they already were. I had ruined it. I had shattered the safe, comfortable distance of our Tuesday afternoon exchanges. Now, I wouldn't even have that. I had traded my quiet, secret admiration for this excruciating, silent breakfast. He seemed to confirm my fears with every move he made. He avoided my gaze, focusing on his coffee, on the window, on anything but me. He moved around my apartment with a quiet efficiency, gathering his things. His damp jacket, his boots, the phone charger he'd borrowed. Each item he picked up felt like a small act of erasure, a deliberate removal of his presence from my space, from my life. The emotional chasm between us, sitting just a few feet apart in my small living room, felt wider and more impassable than the professional distance we had once maintained at my doorway. The silence stretched, thin and brittle, and I was certain it would snap at any moment, and that the sound of its breaking would be my own heart. He finished his coffee in 2 quick gulps and placed the mug carefully in the sink. He rinsed it out. The simple, domestic act was almost unbearable to watch. He was cleaning up after himself, leaving no trace. He was preparing his exit. My stomach twisted itself into a tight, painful knot. I braced myself for the inevitable, for the polite but firm, "Let's just forget this happened" speech that I was sure was coming. I rehearsed my response in my head, a detached and breezy agreement that would hopefully salvage some shred of my dignity. He walked to the door and pulled on his boots. This was it. He was leaving. He would walk out that door, and the fragile, impossible connection we had shared would be nothing more than a strange story I would tell only to myself. He put his hand on the doorknob. My breath caught in my throat. He paused. His shoulders were tense, his back still to me. For a long, agonizing moment, he didn't move. Then, he let out a slow, heavy breath and turned around. He leaned his back against the door, his arms crossed over his chest. He looked at me, and for the first time that morning, his gaze was direct and unflinching. The polite mask was gone, replaced by an expression of raw, uncertain vulnerability that mirrored my own. "Julian," he said, and my name on his lips was no longer a formality. It was an anchor. "We need to talk," the 4 words I had been dreading. I braced for impact, wrapping my arms around myself as if to hold my fragile hope together. I nodded, unable to speak, my throat closing up with fear. I expected rejection, a carefully worded apology, a final, definitive severing of the thread that had so briefly connected us. He ran a hand over his face, a gesture of profound weariness and frustration. "I'm being an idiot," he said, more to himself than to me. "This morning. I'm sorry. I didn't know what to say, what to do." He looked at me, his eyes pleading for understanding. I've been replaying last night in my head over and over, trying to figure out if I just completely imagined all of it. I stared at him, my mind struggling to process his words. This wasn't the rejection speech I had prepared for. This was confusion. This was doubt. This was the same anxiety spiral I had been trapped in all morning. He took a hesitant step away from the door, back into my space. "Last night wasn't a mistake for me, Julian," he said, his voice low and earnest, the rumbling warmth returning to it. "I've wanted to. I've thought about you. A lot. More than just a guy on my route." The confession hung in the air, a stunning, unbelievable revelation. "Every Tuesday, I look forward to this stop. It's ridiculous, I know. It's 30 seconds at a doorway. But it was the best part of my day." A slow, fragile wave of relief began to wash over me, so potent it almost made me dizzy. He had seen me, too. From his side of the doorway, he had been looking back. "When I saw the storm coming," he continued, a faint, self-deprecating smile on his lips, "a part of me was glad. I saw my chance and I lingered. I hoped it would get bad enough that I'd have an excuse. I never thought I'd actually have the nerve to ask to come inside." He shook his head, looking down at the floor. "And when you said yes, and then last night happened, it was more than I ever let myself hope for." He looked up again, his gaze intense. "I know what you're probably thinking. I mentioned a roommate, and you've probably assumed a bunch of other things. There's no one. There hasn't been for a long time. I was with a girl for a few years, but it ended almost a year ago. It ended because I finally admitted to myself that it wasn't fair to her, that I was trying to be someone I wasn't." He took another step closer. "I'm not confused, Julian. I was just scared. Scared that I'd read everything wrong, and that this morning you would look at me with regret." The last of my anxiety dissolved, replaced by a feeling so vast and overwhelming I couldn't name it. It was relief and joy and a profound, bone-deep sense of connection. The misconceptions, the walls of assumption I had so carefully built, had been dismantled, brick, by his honest, vulnerable words. He wasn't unattainable. He wasn't straight. He was just as scared and hopeful as I was. I finally found my voice. "I thought you regretted it," I whispered, the words feeling small and inadequate in the face of his confession. "I've been sitting here all morning telling myself it was a mistake, that I'd ruined everything. I've been admiring you from a distance for months, Leo. I built this whole narrative in my head where you were completely out of reach. Last night felt like a dream, and I was just waiting to wake up." A slow, beautiful smile spread across his face, a real smile that transformed his entire expression and made the crinkles by his eyes reappear. "So you're not regretting it?" he asked, his voice soft with wonder. "No," I said, my voice gaining strength. "It was the least regrettable thing I've ever done." In 2 long strides, he closed the remaining distance between us. He stood before me, so close I could feel the warmth of his body, see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. He gently took my hand, his fingers lacing with mine. His touch was no longer hesitant or questioning. It was sure. It was confident. He lifted my hand and pressed a soft kiss to my knuckles. "Good," he murmured against my skin. "Because I was really hoping I could do this again." He leaned down and kissed me. And this kiss was nothing like the first. There was no hesitation, no uncertainty. It was deep and sure and filled with all the words we had just spoken. It was a kiss of relief, of mutual understanding, of a shared and breathtaking confession. It was the feeling of a long-held tension finally being released. It tasted of coffee and sunlight and the promise of a new beginning. It felt like coming home to a place I had never known existed. We were standing in the middle of my living room, in the harsh light of day, and the world had never felt so soft, so warm, so full of possibility. The storm was over, and something beautiful had begun to grow in its place. The days that followed felt like learning a new language. The rigid grammar of my solitary life was replaced by a fluid, intuitive syntax of we and us. The first time Leo came over when it wasn't a Tuesday felt like a monumental event. He didn't bring groceries. He brought a bottle of wine and 2 steaks, and he stood in my kitchen, my ridiculously tidy kitchen, and made it his own. He cooked, and I watched, mesmerized by the easy, confident way he moved in a space I had only ever known as a domain for one. The sizzle of the steak in the pan, the rich aroma filling the apartment, his low laughter at something I said. These were the sounds and smells of a new kind of order, one that was vibrant and alive. We were navigating a new dynamic, a delicate and exciting dance of discovery. I learned that his quietness was not aloofness, but a deep-seated thoughtfulness. I learned that his hands, which could so easily lift heavy bags, were also incredibly gentle when they traced the line of my spine in the quiet of the night. He learned about my anxieties, about the way I organized my books by color, about my irrational fear of phone calls. He didn't see these things as flaws. He saw them as parts of me, pieces of the puzzle he was slowly, patiently putting together. He never tried to change my order. He simply found a way to fit within it, to expand its boundaries without shattering its structure. Our intimacy deepened not in grand gestures, but in 1,000 small, quiet moments. It was in the way he'd leave a new coffee mug on my counter, a silent offering for his next visit. It was the way I started buying the brand of soap he used, just so I could have his scent in my apartment even when he wasn't there. It was lazy Sunday mornings spent tangled in the sheets on my sofa, the one that had once seemed too big for me and now felt just right for 2. We would talk for hours about everything and nothing, his architectural designs, my latest project, our childhoods, our fears. The walls I had lived behind for so long were not just gone. I could barely remember what they felt like. One rainy evening, a few weeks after that first storm, we were curled up on the sofa watching a movie. A particularly loud clap of thunder rattled the windows, and I felt him tense beside me, an almost imperceptible tightening of his muscles. The memory of that first night, of his vulnerability, rushed back to me. I paused the movie and turned to him. "You okay?" I asked softly. He looked at me, a faint, sheepish smile on his face. "Yeah, it's just I smiled back, a warm, conspiratorial grin. "Are you sure you don't need to come inside and wait it out?" I teased, referencing his line from that first day. He let out a low chuckle, the sound vibrating through my chest as he pulled me closer. He kissed the top of my head. "I think I'm already inside," he said, his voice a warm murmur against my hair. "And I don't think I'm ever leaving." That callback, that shared piece of our history, felt more intimate than any declaration of love. It was our story, encapsulated in a single, silly question. It was the moment the inciting incident of our relationship became a beloved inside joke, a cornerstone of our foundation. I thought back to the man I was before him, the curator of a lonely museum. I had mistaken solitude for safety, order for peace. I had built a fortress to protect myself from the world, but all I had really done was lock myself in. Leo hadn't broken down my walls with force. He had simply stood outside in the rain and asked to be let in. And in opening the door, in taking that one, terrifying risk, I had let in not just the chaos of a storm, but the warmth of the sun that follows. I had discovered that true safety wasn't found in isolation, but in the shelter you build with someone else. It was found in the quiet, steady presence of a man who saw your carefully constructed defenses and, instead of turning away, offered you a towel, a shared silence, and the profound, life-altering comfort of his hand in yours. My life was no longer a silent exhibit behind glass. It was a living, breathing, beautifully chaotic work in progress, and for the first time, I felt like an active participant in my own masterpiece.